Hey, Programming 11. We're going to continue making our enemies better. Better enemies make for a fun game. Because right now, our enemies can do a little bit, but not much. So we're going to do two things. In this video, we're going to focus on making them spawn a little bit slower. Last video we made sure that they didn't spawn on top of obstacles, but now let's make them sort of gradually arise. We're going to have them fade in, so we have a bit of a warning to see that, ooh, they're coming. Gives us a bit of time to go and get them before they become a threat. The second thing we're going to do, and I think I'll cover that in a second video, is going to be making them shoot back at us. If we can't, if they pose no threat, then they're not really very exciting. So let's start. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that they kind of drift in gradually. So what I'd like to do is change up our enemy class. So here's our enemy class here, and I'd like to include a new instance variable. This is actually one of the reasons I want to do this, not just because I think that's a cool idea for the game, but also because it demonstrates a pretty important part of programming. We've been talking a lot in this project about the GameObject class. And how other classes can extend the GameObject class, and that means that they get all their instance variables, and they get access to their constructors, and they get their other functions, and that's been very useful so that our future classes can be a little bit slimmer, right? Like, we didn't write a lot of code for our enemies, even though they're capable of doing all those things. But also, not only do we get to borrow from GameObject, but we can build on top of it. We've already done that a little bit, like, making our own constructor and stuff, but you could also add new instance variables and change how our class behaves based on those new variables. So I'm going to make a new variable. It's going to be called transparency, and that's going to be something that we're going to have to set in our constructor because our super constructor doesn't know about transparency, right? GameObject doesn't have access to that, doesn't know about that. But that's easy to do. We'll just set it to 0. Transparency equals 0. And basically that means when an enemy shows up, it will be transparent. How do we make that number mean something though? Like, this isn't like mouse X or something. It's not built into processing. So we have to put that variable in the fill function to make our circle, that is our enemy, become transparent. And then I'd like to gradually make it go from being invisible to being completely solid. So the way to do that is to override our show function. Right now our enemies do show up even though we don't have a show function because they're completely just borrowing this show function in the GameObject. Right, here's GameObject, we're extending GameObject, so that means this is the show function for enemy. But I'm going to alter it, so I'm going to copy and paste it over here. And now it will use this show function, which is a tentacle, but we can make changes to it, and it will choose this one instead. So my main change is I want to include transparency in here. If I include transparency in here, then it will apply to this color and will make it somewhat transparent. So instead of just seeing orange, we will see a transparent version of orange. Now that's pretty boring right now because they're basically ghosts. They're invisible. Transparency is set to 0, so that means it'll be 0. We got to bring it up, and if it gets to 255, that means it's solid. So what I'd like to do in our act function is make it increase. So I can say something like transparency equals, I can't do that before super.act. I'll try again. Transparency equals transparency plus 1. You could also do, because transparency is a pretty long variable name, you can also just do transparency plus plus, and you don't have to type it twice. So that'll increase every frame, and maybe we don't do it too much. Like, maybe we say something like, if you don't want it to go over 255, so something like if transparency is less than 255, let's go ahead and plus it. Let's increase it by 1. So what effect will this have? Let's find out. Let's run it. And you'll see that the enemies don't just immediately show up. Can you see them starting to float into existence? Like they are like emerging from the green, like they're almost like teleporting in. And it takes a bit of time for them to become solid. Unfortunately, the orange and the green are a little bit, I don't know, like it's a little bit hard to see the different things. So I think I'm gonna change their colors. This is not a big deal. You can leave it as orange if you want to, but I think I'll switch mine up to, I don't know, like white. How does that look? Let's see how white looks. So they're kind of like ghosts or something, like kind of emerging. That looks pretty good. Hey, you can definitely see that pretty sharp against the green. So I think I'll make them like you know, almost like a ghost or a spirit that's sort of emerging. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. You know, you can change the color to be whatever you want, as long as it looks visible. The orange didn't look too visible. So you know what? I'm gonna call that the end of this video, and come in for the next video to watch how we can make these enemies start pew-pewing at us. And then, you know, our final thing in our project will be to make it so that, you know, we can lose and win the game. And I think that'll have made a pretty amazing piece of object-oriented software. All right, thanks, folks. Tune in for our next video.